Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for participating today. Victory Bridge Foundation's Resilience and Recovery Support Forum is a bi-weekly virtual support Zoom meeting that takes place on Mondays from 3 to 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time in a safe and confidential environment. The forum is open to all service members, veterans, first responders, and their families. It is important to note that the forum is not a substitute for mental health counseling or therapy. Rather, we encourage participants to seek both individual and group therapy for comprehensive support. Today, this forum features Maimoni, a licensed marriage and family therapist covering topics designed to build self-awareness and coping skills. He specializes in fostering strong, healthy relationships. His practice reflects his deep respect for military service members, veterans, and first responders, acknowledging the unique challenges that they face. He is acutely aware of the growing mental health needs within these communities and the gap between demand and available support. Luis became a therapist in 2013, and in 2020, he launched his private practice with the intention of bridging this gap.
Well, hi, everybody. And I want to thank you all for inviting me on here. It's an honor and a privilege for me to be here. This is my first time presenting with your organization. So what I'm hoping is that it is casual, that it is informal, that it is useful, mostly useful. I want it to be really worth your time. Matt, did you want to say a few self-introductory words before we get rolling here?
Hey, how you doing, everyone? Matt Christensen here. Great to be with you today, and looking forward to our discussion. And just a little bit about myself. Military, Army, retired, and working through PTSD issues myself. So great to be here, and looking forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen because I did prepare a PowerPoint. Healing the home front is what I'm calling this, connecting and reconnecting. Because as we deploy, as we come back, whether we're a first responder going on a daily mission, or somebody that is deploying overseas for 6 days, we're always connecting and reconnecting. And we find that trauma, PTSD impacts relationships at home in a very negative way, and it makes connecting and reconnecting a lot harder. So that's what I'd like to talk about today. To get started, when you do dangerous things for a living, your emotional system copes by adapting to the danger. We human beings have been on Earth for 200,000 years or so. We have survived all kinds of dangerous situations because of our adaptations. So this idea that we have PTSD and it's a bad thing, there's a lot of negative that we think about it. But in fact, PTSD helps us do what we had to do. It helped us stay alive. And it's just that when we come back into a civilian or a home environment, a place where we're trying to have intimate relationships with a partner or a family or a child, it is not helpful. The reason it is not helpful is because trauma, whether it's full PTSD or not, prioritizes your physical safety over relationships. So even if I love someone, if I have a history of trauma, then I'm always thinking about what that person might do to keep me physically, mentally, emotionally unsafe. And so all of these PTSD symptoms, and you may not have all of them, you may not have any of them, intrusive memories, avoidance. I think everybody on this podcast or webinar is familiar with the range of PTSD symptoms. In treating these veterans and first responders, what I hear very often is Yeah, I don't really have PTSD. Doesn't really bother me. I'm not like that. I wasn't affected that way. I didn't see combat. The kind of things that you're thinking of that happened to me didn't actually happen to me. It wasn't that bad for me. So what my response is, okay, so no PTSD, no trauma, but your emotional system has been adapting to your environment since before you were born. If there was domestic violence between mom and dad, your emotional system was adapting to it way back then. Whatever you went through, if you had issues of childhood, that affected you. And so if you entered the military from a perfect family where you were always supported and loved and knew that you were safe, then you have a lot of resilience against the things that might drive you to some of these PTSD reactions. But most of us had different childhoods than that. Both parents working, maybe there was poverty. Maybe there's a lot of reasons that we have something other than the ideal childhood that makes us PTSD resilient. And I'm using the term PTSD, but I really mean trauma. I'll talk more about that in a moment. To get into the difference here, we think of ourselves as a human being, but for the purpose of this discussion, I want to break out the emotional system versus the cognitive system. People with a history of trauma or PTSD prefer to spend life in the cognitive lane. My thoughts, I like to be logical, I like to be factual, I like to make decisions based on what is observable. I like to be just a good, rational human being. There are a couple of problems with that. And with respect to the issue at hand here today, relationships, it's great to connect cognitively with someone, but a relationship is about an emotional connection. And so if we have, and there's a phrase, emotional numbing, I'll talk a little bit more about it, but the number we get, the harder it is to sustain a relationship because we're just not using that part of our brain. Why do we not use it? Well, the reason that we don't use it is because our emotional system is adapted to this history of trauma. By that, I mean, when you are in places where bad things are going on around you, those tough emotions come up: fear, terror, horror. These are not emotions that we want to be with. And so the emotional system adapts by just tamping them down. And so our cognitive system, which remains intact, starts trying to run things. In therapy and in mental health, we talk about this thing called the cognitive triangle. Thoughts, what we think, right? I think I'll have a donut. Emotions, what we feel. I love this girl. Behavior, what we do. I'm going to ask this girl out for donuts, right? So these are the three things that kind of define who we are as human beings. What happens when we start getting emotionally numb? Well, emotional numbness in a clinical definition characterized by blankness or distance. And just like PTSD, we think of it as a binary. I either have PTSD or I don't. But in fact, think of it as like a tachometer or a speedometer on your car or a thermostat at home. It's a continuum. It goes from a little bit to very much a lot. And you probably know people that have a very, very heavy dose of PTSD, so heavy that they cannot function. And you may know other people that had some rough experiences, have some symptoms of trauma, but they do okay, and everything in between. So just because you were exposed to bad childhood, combat, on the job shooting, what have you, doesn't mean that you're full on PTSD. It means that you're just affected to some degree. I'm going to go back to how your emotional system's response to trauma is adaptive. If you fall apart, if you break down, if you cannot function in an intense environment where there's shooting going on, for example, or if you're in pursuit of a suspect, or if you're fighting a fire, losing it is dangerous, and you can hurt yourself, and you can allow others to get hurt because you fail in your own function. So this response, this trauma response, is adaptive. I want to just emphasize the fact that there's nothing wrong with you for being this way. It's an adaptive response to your circumstances. But when I come home, when I'm at the home front, now the problems come up because all of these trauma responses are not adapted to living at home and being with a partner. And so it is hard to close the emotional distance from family and friends. It's hard to listen and be understood. It's hard to be heard, and it's hard to listen. And then there's intimacy problems. Intimacy means more than just sex. By that I mean, excuse me, that place where two human beings really let their guard down and share of the best and most sacred parts of themselves. If I've been through a lot of trauma, I myself am disconnected from that in me, and so I cannot share it because I have learned to protect that most intimate part of myself. It is the most vulnerable part of myself, and therefore it is the toughest to access. Problems parenting is, its own whole topic, but I wanted to mention it here. It's really tough when you're deployed and you come back and the kids have a relationship with your partner or a caregiver, instead of you trying to have authority. If you have views, if I'm in the military, if I'm a first responder, that's a very hierarchical way of living, but families don't always operate that way. Partners don't always operate that way, and there might be real differences about how we're going to structure the home. And so if you don't get along with your partner, don't agree with your partner, that's an issue. Connecting with your children, that's an issue. But there's one more thing, and we should mention it. And did we mention anger management? I mean, what do you think happens when we stuff our emotions down? What do you think happens when we pretend we're not feeling or disconnect from them? Those feelings don't actually go away. They're just buried inside it. Some people use the word compartmentalize. Yeah, all that stuff happened to me, but I don't really think about it anymore. Oh, but it's there and it's working. Hidden, waiting, and ready to explode. And this is why so many people that are first responders, that are veterans, that are active military, have this explosive temper. It's an interesting thing because they seem so, it seems like they're grooving right along. They get along with everybody. They have the camaraderie is absolutely there. You feel like they're rock solid, reliable because they never want to show any stress. And all that stress is internalized. It's like a landmine. It just doesn't bother anybody until you step on it. And then when it gets triggered, it's really dangerous. So, kind of transitioning in this part of my talk, I'm getting to, near the end of it. I'm hoping to get some feedback from somebody. I want to answer the question, what can you do to better connect with yourself and those around you? And I thought I would just talk about a case study. As you might expect, the names have been changed. Everything's been changed about this to protect the innocent or the guilty or what have you. But the case that this is modeled on, it's a Marine veteran that I treated. He's got his 26-year-old wife. He married her a year ago. They have a 4-year-old kid. So the kid was produced before the marriage was. But our veteran does have PTSD. Interestingly enough, it's not from his Marine experience. He never was deployed. He never went on a deployment. It's from growing up in a high school, in an environment where everybody was drinking and using a lot of drugs. And so he was food insecure. He was housing insecure. He never had a sense of emotional safety. He was frequently undercut by his family. His dad made passes with, sometimes successfully, with girlfriends. And so the military was actually quite good for him. He enjoyed it. He loved it. And he found this girl, they fell in love, they had a baby. So how does this play out? So our Marine is the time bomb. He's waiting to go off. And, when he goes and, he's out and he's working, and he'll come back. And if he finds a candy wrapper in the car, he wants to know who she's been with. She may not have been with anybody. The thing is, how does she prove fidelity to a man who has learned that there isn't any such thing as a reliable, intimate connection? Really, really tough for him. Now, he doesn't beat her. I mean, I'm using the punching bag there. But there is verbal domestic abuse, verbal domestic violence. She's crazy about him. She's staying with him. She wants to be able to keep the family together to take care of the child, who is, of course, terrified. But some of the details are changed, but the substance of this case is not changed. How do we make this family whole? How does the veteran take accountability for his own history and overcome it? And I think that all of you watching have probably had some exposure to ways to self-regulate. The classic is take some deep breaths, count for 100, take a workout, go for a walk around the block. All of those things are good but temporary ways to solve the problem. Over the long term, this is really probably the last thing I'm going to say, because I feel like I've spoken for, well, I know I'm over my time limit, so that's another good reason for me to stop talking. But this journey to having a happy, healthy home, true intimacy with the ones that you love, starts with self-discovery, really leaning into who I am. It's tough if you have a history of trauma, because the way that your brain is wired and your experience, the way you handle things, is to avoid conflict, to avoid trauma. But at home, every issue that gets avoided just gets swept under the rug. And pretty soon those piles under the rug start getting bigger and bigger, to where there's no place left to walk around the home that's safe. So you start looking inward. Looking inward. I'm a big fan of, well, I'm actually going to stop now and just say, look, this is the gist of what I wanted to say. It's been Luis talking for like 25 minutes. That's longer than I usually like to talk, uninterrupted, and I wonder where we would like to go from here.
So Luis, this is Vince. So what are some effective communicate? So if you are, excuse me, if there's some common signs for this emotional numbness or distancing that affects one's relationship, like what are some signs of this? What are some ways we can see that this exists in a relationship?
So this is actually a great question. One of the things that whatever is our norm feels normal. So if I tell you that, hey, your childhood wasn't that great, how do you know that? I came up through the community mental health system, County of Los Angeles. So I was treating a pediatric population. My client was a 7-year-old boy who had been raped by his 13-year-old brother. And the mother, who is supposed to keep the 7-year-old child safe, favored the 13-year-old and blamed the 7-year-old. So these were his circumstances. And I asked him about his family, and he just said, yeah, my family loves me. And so when I speak to someone that has a history of trauma, that has maybe some deeply buried trauma, the usual answer is, I'm fine. I'm okay. I don't let this stuff bother me. It's in my past. It's meaningless. These are all kinds of answers. So how do you know? Well, I think your number one symptom is if you have those angry explosions. If you're having the explosions, that's a thing. Speak to your intimate partner. Do they feel that they can connect with you, or do they crave conversations about feelings? How easy is it for you to feel love for someone? How easy to tell you to love them? How well do you understand how they love you? How do you feel love, perceive love? What does it feel like in your body? If I was to ask you what joy feels like, where do you feel joy in your body? What triggers joy in you? Those are the kinds of questions that start a dialogue. It all does start with self-awareness. If you don't know that you are numbing your emotions, because that's just how your body has reacted over all of this history, then you won't know to fix it. So do look at your relationships, the people that are important to you, and look at your own behavior. If you explode, and you don't necessarily have to explode into physical violence. What if you have substance abuse issues? Well, substances are a great way to avoid what's really going on inside of you. So if you find that you're drinking a lot, if you find you're doing cocaine, some of the people that I speak to are freaking pharmacies. Their bodies are so full of things, you know? If you're doing all of that, it's like, what are you trying to avoid? So that's where I would start with that question.
And Luis, are there some kind of practical techniques or exercises that someone can do to reconnect with their emotions and their partners? Like if they're disconnected, what are ways that they can do to kind of bridge that, to feel more connected with their partners? Is there a first step they can take?
Well, first I would be to assess their lives. One of the things, and this isn't just people with PTSD, this happens to everybody and anybody. Life gets really busy. And I've got a job and my partner has a job. And if we have a kid or two, the amount of time that we have for ourselves is extremely limited. And a lot of times we're really tired. And there is always, I mean, children always want something. Employers always want more. And there's just always stuff around the house to do. The laundry, the cooking, the dishwashing, the mow the lawn, all of that. And so the first thing to do is prioritize your relationship. Your house cannot work if you don't prioritize your partner. Whatever, it doesn't really matter. Anything else that you might try to do, if you don't count your partner as number one, your relationship will fail. And people say, well, what about the kids? No, the kids don't benefit from being equal in the household. The kids need the structure of, two parents, preferably at the top. And if you're a single parent, then you're a single parent, and that's extra challenging. But start by making time. And once you've made time, have some conversations, go on some dates, find a way to get childcare if you need it, and start. I mean, the easiest thing in the world is start having fun again together. And then once you're able to do that and just really connect on even a surfacey level like that, then you can start doing a deeper dive and doing structured conversations and use some of the therapy techniques that we talk about, such as reflective listening, you know, or a structured weekly check-in is another good technique. And most therapists, most couples therapists can guide you around those things.
I guess, Luis, this is Frank, just to kind of jump in on Vince's question there, but so if you're a veteran or a first responder that notices these signs of emotional numbness, I guess, what steps does a person take when they recognize these signs? So do they contact a family therapist, or do they contact behavioral health, a psychiatrist or psychologist? What steps do they take so they can get to the first step in kind of helping them get the right advice?
Reaching out for mental health support is critical. One of the reasons that I am here is because I realize that it is sometimes hard to access somebody like me, particularly if you're trying to go through the VA. I don't have personal experience with it, but I understand it's tough. But I would actually, just assess your circumstances and go from there. You may be able to join a group of other veterans and just talk about what you're all experiencing. If you can reach out to somebody in behavioral health like myself, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. That's great. Social worker could be great. Psychiatrist is different. Psychiatrists are MDs, medical doctors, that can prescribe drugs. So if you feel that you need medication to self-regulate, that is what a psychiatrist is for. I always like to do, I support it. If you need medication, go get yourself medicated. But a lot of times, when a tire is so overfull that it's ready to blow, if you can just get on that valve stem and just start letting the air out, it decreases the pressure and you don't have to medicate the tire, to mangle my metaphor. So just having someone, it is difficult to try to talk out your history and your anger with your loved one. And that is because it's not their job to be your therapist. It helps to have a lot of training. One of the things somebody like me can do is listen and be non-reactive and empathetic. Sometimes the things that we have trauma around are things that we are not proud of, things that we might even have a lot of shame around, things that are very hard to talk about. And so I just can't go talking to anybody casually about that. If it's things like that that are driving it, then definitely look for somebody licensed. There are a lot of directories of therapists. They're not hard to find. I would also mention Give an Hour. I volunteer an hour a week, just pro bono or free therapy to a military, active duty, or their family, or first responder or their family. And you can just go to giveanhour.org and do a search, and there's a lot of therapists that are giving back to your community because we feel it's necessary or because we want to. Was that okay? Did I answer it, Frank?
Yeah, yes, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the whole presentation. Really like the way that you've broken things down, have all the pictures for us. You talked a little bit about reflexive listening, and I'm wondering if you found any other kind of just communication techniques or strategies that work well. Because I know, for me personally, sometimes it's, my wife saying, "I really don't know what to say or how to help you right now." So any kind of strategies that may be helpful.
Okay, so that's like a question I could do a seminar on. And in fact, I think that Wednesdays you guys do it where how does the caregiver care for the veteran, the active duty, the first responder? So that question kind of comes out of that. But I think the first thing I want to do is say, if you don't know what you need from her, then she can't possibly know either. So give some thought to what do you need. Sometimes you just need somebody to listen. One of the assumptions that men in particular make is that when people tell us something, disclose something, what we are looking for is advice, or what we're looking to. And so we tend to give advice. But you don't necessarily need advice from your wife. What you're looking for is, look, I just have all this stuff inside me and I need to share it. What I really need for you is to hear me and see me. And maybe those words will give your wife the instructions that she needs. When I use the term reflective listening, that's a kind of a separate discussion to me. That's more of when there's a back and forth. When when a couple has a conflict, listening kind of stops because the only reason we could possibly be having an argument is because you don't sufficiently understand my point of view. If you did, you would agree with me, right? But both parties to the disagreement feel the same way. And so we end up with interruption, we end up with over talking, we end up with people not feeling heard, so they raise their voices, and it's just a formula for a bad outcome. So with reflective listening, one person states their point of view, and the other person reflects what they heard in their own words before they respond to it. When we are in conflict, we immediately, emotionally, reflexively, become defensive. We put our guards up and we don't listen and we look for where we can attack. And we only listen to the point where we have something that we can say in response to it. And then we're just waiting for our turn to speak and say what's on our mind. We're not really listening. So reflective listening is an attempt to break into that cycle and say, before I respond to you, I'm going to actually understand what you're saying. And so it's really useful. Once I say to you, okay, you hear me, then I know that when you respond, you've actually heard me. One of the things that happens that's a side benefit is a lot of times when we are responding to somebody saying, and we're having a disagreement, the response really isn't to the point that I was trying to make. It's to some other point. So it really behooves us to take that moment, do the reflective listening. And the last thing I'll say on it, because it's a big topic, is keep it relatively short. 3 sentences is ideal. A lot of times when, remember I was talking about how issues got put under the rug. And so when I finally get a chance to talk and it looks like you're listening, I tend to go on and list every single thing that annoyed me, made me mad, didn't go my way, hurt my feelings, and so forth. And it's way too much for a person to hear all at once. So you just say, look, I just can't stand the way you load the dishwasher. It bothers me because it's not efficient. We have to use more water and do the dishes more often. Why can't you just load the dishwasher the right way? That's nice and short, and it doesn't talk about all the different times that you didn't load the dishwasher right. It just makes the point. Then I can respond and say, so you don't like the way I load the dishwasher. Well, I really think the dishwasher is there for us. Anyway, then you take it from there.
Thanks, Louise. Hey, I just on the same topic, just using the dishwasher comment. So when we talk about emotional numbness, we typically associate that with with the service member, first responder. But an example, like for service members, I think spouses as well tend to get probably from different stressors, right? They have emotional numbness as well to different stressors because they've been running a household without their partner for an entire year or 15 months, dealing with certain things. And so, you know, what may stress a soldier coming back home doesn't stress the spouse because they've been dealing with it and running it a certain way, kind of like the dishwasher. And so, well, I've been doing it for a whole year while you've been gone, and now it bugs you. And so I think there's probably both sides, and effective communication, just like you're bringing up, is what both parties would need. And I mean, because I think we often forget that that service in the military or as a first responder, there's a lot of stressors on the other side that they get emotionally numb to, right, as well. I mean, death being one of them, hearing about death, seeing
The worry.
yeah,
Sure.
yeah. So
You know, any discussion of military families, it's like they're part of the effort too. You know, I don't know if anybody that understands anything about the community that downplays the importance of family in supporting the deployed service member, and the stresses that they go through, the anxiety. Will dad come home? Will mom come home? You don't even know. It's really tough. And so then when the deployed member comes home and things are not to their liking, that can be difficult because, especially in cases where the communication is difficult to sustain when on deployment, because there are kinds of deployments where you can't really communicate that much. And so what you come home to, it's great to see your kids, it's great to see your spouse, your partner, but you just don't know that much about how the house is really being run. You don't know that much about the day to day. And things that you might have done an intervention on way earlier and you think, oh, are now just like out of control. And you want to know why spouse didn't control it. And so that's a very tough situation to come home to. And this is where the partnership between really gets tested. And you know, there may be disagreements around what time Jimmy does his homework, right? There may be the guideline that I would give there is that anytime you win a relationship, anytime your spouse, let me phrase that, anytime you win a fight or an argument, anytime your spouse wins a fight or an argument, the relationship is lost. You cannot win a fight with your spouse, your partner, and have the relationship be better for it. You must find a way to meet. And that can be really tough given the stressors and the timeframes involved, but it can be done.
So thank you. As you're talking about stressors, and you know, kind of this emotional numbness that can come, you know, as a result of PTSD or is there any kind of ways to distinguish? Because sometimes, you know, like, hey, I'm going through a stressful time here, and you know, having certain reactions versus, you know, um is this, you know, a result of PTSD? And then are there different ways of responding or self-managing as you go through that journey?
So let me see if I understand the question. I think what you're saying is sometimes I have these stressful responses that are driven by PTSD, but sometimes I just seem to react in ways that I should not react, that don't appear to be triggered by the PTSD. How do I know the difference? Was that the question?
Right, right. Yes. Yep.
Okay, so as a practical matter, I would ask, how much does it really matter? What's driving it? It's all the same emotional system that is creating these reactions. We, in our cognitive side of our brain, try to compartmentalize, and that's something that a lot of veterans, first responders do. They just learn to do it because if they brought all the stuff that they see it on the job, they brought that all home, it would just be disastrous. So they try to lock it out, but it's all still there. It's not like the brain's job is to think, the brain's job is to feel, the body's job is to feel. It doesn't stop doing those functions until we're dead. So maybe here's a way to think of it in terms of like the model. We humans, we have three things that we manage: our time, our money, and our energy. And we only have limited amounts of each. So if we have an underlying case, a baseline case of PTSD, then a certain amount of our resources are always being spent to manage our reactivity around PTSD symptoms and behaviors. That means there's less available for everything else. And so even though it might not be directly triggered by the PTSD, the fact that you didn't have the bandwidth you want to have could be attributable to the underlying PTSD. I should mention, by the way, that I don't know this, I'm not giving you specific advice. I don't know your background. I don't know you know what I'm saying? So keep in mind that sounded like something that I might have said in a therapy setting, and this isn't therapy. This is just a hypothesis that might appeal to you, or that might apply to you, I should say. And it would be up to you to decide if it feels true.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And it's just, sometimes I think as, veterans or whatever, sometimes maybe we overthink and try to overanalyze, and when you have a, PTSD diagnosis, and then all of a sudden you're trying, everything seems to link to that. And then you start to second guess, you know, decisions you're making or how you respond in certain circumstances. And it sounds like you're saying, it probably doesn't matter so much, as much as you keep moving in a positive direction, keep communicating, keep talking, keep developing strategies. So yeah,
So
thank you.
there's one thing I'd like to jump in on that. Because all of the strategies that you identified were cognitive strategies. And part of PTSD, part of trauma is, we want to avoid those feelings because they are bad, because, we don't, those intrusive recollections, we don't want them. But we cannot outrun what is buried so deeply inside of us. PTSD kind of actually sits inside your body. It is not just a mental, emotional thing, it's a physical thing. It's part of your nervous system. You have, axons, dendrites in your brain, right? Passing messages along that are optimized to deal. So if we are over analyzing, we might be thinking when what we need to be doing is turning towards our feelings. We cannot outrun them. They are not pleasant, but we can take ourselves, we can, and this is where you need to learn to relax first before you try to take this stuff on. You need to be able to learn how to self-regulate so that when your body amps up in response to the kinds of memories or traumas that you need to get past, you have to know how to and there's a lot of ways to self-regulate. I use mindfulness. I'm a big mindfulness guy. And so when you find yourself thinking, analyzing, what I would encourage you to do is to find a place that is quiet, park yourself, take some deep breaths, and just notice what is going on in your body. And you will probably find that there is tension in your chest, tension in your neck and shoulders, Maybe it's hard to hold your foot still, maybe your foot taps, maybe your fingers drum. And if you find all of that going on, that's the anxiety driven by PTSD coming out. And if you can learn to breathe your way through it and downregulate, then start turning more and more towards those. And then you need to probably work with somebody in terms of, okay, this horrible stuff is coming up. I don't know how to deal with it because it was really bad. And that is where you might really benefit from professional support, or a peer that has been through it. It's not an everyday conversation you can just have with people. We must turn towards what is going on, the feelings. If we're going to address it, right? I mean, we can run from it. We can try to run from it, and a lot of people do their whole lives. They don't want to deal with it because it's bad. But if you want to because you cannot outrun it, and people say forgive and forget or forget it. You can't forget. It's burned into your brain. You can't forget it. So you have to make peace with it. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, that is the challenge. That's what we work on one-on-one.
The challenge would be getting to that one-on-one, I think.
Are you referencing just the difficulty of getting qualified mental health care?
No, the challenge is encouraging others to act on to act on some of the signs that they're seeing.
Right. Well, just remember, when you look at those PTSD symptoms, avoidance is right there. It's, when you're trying to keep PTSD, dealing with PTSD, that symptom of avoidance is a big, it's like when you're depressed, when you're treating somebody who's depressed, they're so depressed, they don't want to do anything. They just want to lay around and feel bad. They have no energy. They're a verb, no get up and go. And so every mental health condition brings with it challenges to overcome that are driven by the condition. So avoidance is a PTSD favorite. I guess the other one would be to remember that denial is not just a river in Egypt. Hashtag dad joke. Seeing some smiles out there. Okay.
Well, we have about 4 minutes left.
Oh, we do? Okay.
Yeah. And if Vince or Matt, if you have one last question that you might want to ask before we wrap this session up.
Thank you so much, Luis. I really appreciate this. Is incredible. Very much appreciate your time.
Yeah. I think that what I would say is, we can try to be clinical. Is it PTSD? Is it something else? Is it just I don't know how to be in a family? We learn how to be a husband, a father, a wife, a mother, a sister, a brother from our families of origin, whatever that looked like. And so when I come to my relationships, that's what I bring. And so the thing to look at is, how am I doing? I'm a relationships guy, and I tend to view things through a lens of relationships. So if your relationship isn't what you want it to be, if things are really tense at home, if you feel you can't speak to your partner, if you can't get your kids to do what you want, if your household is chaos, if you fear deployment, not for what you're going to face, but for what you're leaving behind, those are all indications that it's time to move forward. I would say maybe it's not the right thing to tell somebody to go and get their PTSD treated. Just let them know that guys like me are out there, and what we want to do is have them have happier and more fulfilling life at home. Because that's really, what it's all about. And thanks, Phil. You're welcome for all those kind words.
Yeah. Matt, any last comments?
I just say thank you very much. Very informative, and also really appreciate, especially your comments about prioritizing, spouses, partners, and it's a hard one. But look, turning toward the feelings as opposed to running away are kind of the couple things that really have settled in for me personally. So thank you.
Well, remain grateful for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
We really do appreciate your time. It was great having you on here. Great discussion and lessons on understanding relationships, increasing self-awareness for all of us, and how to self-regulate. I do want to thank you for your support to our community. We're fortunate to have great people like yourself willing to give your time in an effort to make us all better. And hopefully in the future, we can have you back here at Victory Bridge.
I would look forward to it. So take care, everybody. Thanks again.
Okay, bye.
Bye.